Hi, welcome to a Physionic detailed study analysis. Today we're going to be looking at a study, a relatively simple study, actually quite simple study, looking at the effects that red ginseng supplement has in combating erectile dysfunction. So we're going to be going over a series of different measures of how ginseng affects erectile dysfunction, from the maintenance of erections to getting erections to confidence around sex, things like that. So there's going to be a little bit of surprising information, but for the most part, it'll be pretty encouraging. If you're not familiar with who I am, my name is Nicholas Verhoeven. I'm a PhD candidate in molecular medicine, and I read studies essentially for a living. It's a huge passion of mine, one of probably the biggest passion of them all. Sounded almost like Lord of the Rings there. The greatest passion of them all, and in the darkness. But anyway, if you're here to find out about ginseng and the effect on erectile dysfunction, you've come to the right place. All right, let's get into it. So the topics that we're going to be covering are rather numerous. So beyond just the effect that ginseng has on erections, so we are going to be looking at red ginseng and if it improves erection number and quality, and I'll define what quality is as we get through the questions and the data that we're going through. And if you're part of my Physionic Insider group, insider community, then you also get access to these two questions. So the effect that this ginseng has on testosterone levels, as well as some other health metrics like prolactin, looking at cholesterol, and I believe one other. And we're also going to look at the mechanism of action. So how does ginseng actually enact its role, its effect on the penis and combating erectile dysfunction? So if you're interested in the entirety of this video, including these two questions, then hop on over, join the Physionic Insiders, and you'll get access to this complete analysis, plus all my other study analyses, plus my seminars where I put together hundreds of studies into one seminar and give you applicable takeaways, along with my office hours where you get to ask me questions live. So it's a good time. We'll just put it that way. So if you're interested, I'll put a link as well as the ticker. And if you're just interested in this first question, then let's just keep blowing through this. And the information that we'll be gleaning the answers comes from this, as I mentioned, really simple study. So a study of the efficacy of Korean red ginseng on the treatment of erectile dysfunction. And here's the DOI number if anything were to ever change. Because the links, so if you go to like URL links, they can be broken from time to time. A DOI is supposed to be consistently always attributed to this study. So if you look up the DOI number, you'll be able to find this study, regardless of where you put it in. Now, in terms of the funding for this study, it was really difficult for me to find, and I was not able to find a clear source of the funding. But from my understanding is it seems to be all public money. That is just what I was able to glean. If I end up finding out that it's private money of some sort, through some sort of funding through a nonprofit, or if it's through for-profit company, whatever it might be, then I'll post an amendment to this video. But if you don't see anything, then the assumption is that it is public funding, meaning that there is some sort of government funding taken from taxpayers, and no conflicts of interest. All right, so how did they go about this study? They went about this study by recruiting. They actually ended up recruiting like over 100 men, and then they had these men go through a particular urologist that then was able to decide or diagnose if they had mild or moderate ED, erectile dysfunction. And they ended up disqualifying a certain number of individuals because they either had ED because they had their prostate removed, or they had some sort of kind of extraneous reason as to why they were experiencing ED. It wasn't just because they were living their life and they just started to experience ED. And they ended up recruiting 60 individuals, 60 men into this study that had either mild to moderate erectile dysfunction. That was determined by a particular questionnaire. We're going to go through those questions as we go through this video. But it's just a 5-question questionnaire where they essentially ask them, okay, we'll rate on a scale of 1 to 5 the difficulties with particular ED symptoms. And these individuals were in their 50s and they were of mixed health. And the reason why I say mixed health, why I wrote mixed health here, is because when you look at their characteristics, they had some of them had hypertension, some had diabetes, and some had cardiovascular disease of other types. If that's like peripheral artery disease, if that's heart disease of some sort. And the reason why I point that out is because, one, ED can strongly correlate with, for example, hypertension and cardiovascular disease, mainly because of the mechanism of action that we're actually going to go over is related to that. And related to the vessels that are found in the penis. But how they went about this, and I'll come back to this in just a second, but once they recruited these individuals, they had 30 individuals that were then given the red Korean ginseng at 1,000 milligrams a day, and the other group was given a placebo, which essentially means that they were not given the red Korean ginseng. Now, both groups did not know what they were consuming. They didn't know, like this group didn't know, hey, the researchers weren't like, hey, okay, just so you know, this is red Korean ginseng. And the other group was like, hey, just so you know, this is not red Korean ginseng, because you want to blind the subjects or the participants as much as possible in that situation, because if they are aware of what they're consuming, they may have some preconceived notions of how they should be responding on the survey. So neither of these groups had any idea. So they end up consuming their respective treatments. So if that's red Korean ginseng or placebo, for 12 weeks. Nothing else changed. The only thing that changed was the consumption of each one of these pills. So it was in a pill form for 12 weeks. And then they actually ended up measuring, I think, every 4 weeks, but they end up doing the long-term measures or the final measures at 12 weeks. And statistically speaking, I realize people's eyes are going to glaze over, but bear with me just for a second. Statistically speaking, we've got 2 comparisons. We have a comparison of the within treatment, so the pre versus post. So if we're talking pre, we're talking about before taking the particular treatment, if that's placebo or red Korean ginseng, and then post, which is after the 12 weeks. So comparing these 2 time points, the data from here versus the data from here. Another comparison, which is really important, extremely critical, is the comparison between the placebo and the red Korean ginseng. So comparing the post data, so after 12 weeks of each treatment, what's the data here versus the data here? And I wanted to come back here because when we look at the characteristics of each group, you want to make sure that you don't have too many people, let's say, that have cardiovascular disease in one group. If you have, let's say, as we said, 30 people in a group, let's say placebo or the red Korean ginseng, and 15 of those people have cardiovascular disease, and the other group, let's say placebo, doesn't have anybody with cardiovascular disease, that could be the distinguishing factor. That could be the confounding factor for why the results are different between the 2 groups. So they added this in here to show the difference or the similarity between the 2 groups. And there aren't these massive differences between the 2 groups in the number of people that have hypertension, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease, which is nice to see. That's typically what you'd want to see. I mean, there's a slightly more people with hypertension in the placebo, but it's 4 individuals more, and you're talking about a sample size of 30. So could it have a tiny effect? Maybe, but probably not going to have a huge effect. And this is also where it's important to look at the statistics, to look at the pre versus the post, and look at the between treatments statistics, because the between treatments statistics may be affected by this, but the within treatments may not be affected because you're comparing the same person at two different time points. So nothing's going to change except for whatever changes with the treatment. Hopefully I'm making sense with that. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually look at the data itself. So we're going to start at Q1 here. I'm going to walk you through this. Here we've got our first question. So this is based off of this particular questionnaire, this ED questionnaire. And the first question is, how do you rate confidence that you will get and keep an erection? So this is more of a psychological question, but we're going to get into the physiological, like the actual outcomes in just with the next question, the question after that. So the first question is right here. We've got our pre-treatment. So this is the within treatments conditions. So we're comparing, this is before they were on their particular treatment, if that's placebo or Korean red ginseng. And we've got our post-treatment, which is 12 weeks later. And this, so we can compare this against this, and we can also compare this against the placebo. And so if we're looking at the statistics here, we're looking at the statistics on this side is going to be a comparison of the pre versus post. So this is the within treatments comparison. However, the comparison here is going to be a comparison of the post-treatment between both conditions, both treatments. So talking about Korean red ginseng versus placebo. And we're looking for a p-value of less than, they've set theirs at 0.05, which is pretty standard. So if it's anything less than that, you're going to find a statistical difference between the two. So for the first question, so how do you rate your confidence? 1 would be very low, 5 would be very high. And if we look here, before the treatments, they were at 3.4. So we're looking at these numbers on the left. Standard deviations, if you're in statistics, standard deviations are on the right, meaning the amount of variance, the amount of variability in each of these measures. So some people had like a 4, some people had a 3, some people had a 2.4. That's what I mean by variability. But the actual average result is on the left side. So that's how you read that. So the Korean red ginseng at 3.4 average, and the placebo at 3.1 average. And there's no real difference between those, even though technically the numbers are different. The variability is so wide that you wouldn't detect a difference here. And there's probably no difference here anyway. Now, the pre versus post, so now we're looking at the statistics here. 3.4 to 3.8, yes, that is an increase. You would think that maybe that's an increase in confidence, or 3.1 to 3.2, but both of these are statistically speaking non-significant. And then if we compare the two between one another, they're again non-significant. So in terms of confidence, the takeaway here, the confidence aspect is that there was no change in confidence. So people didn't feel more confident after consuming these treatments for 12 weeks. So psychologically speaking, there's no benefit of either condition, Korean red ginseng or a placebo. Okay, so the next question then is, when you had erections with sexual stimulation, how often were your erections hard enough for penetration? So 1 is, again, the worst value, so almost never or never. And 5 is almost always to always. So the higher the number, the better. So if we look at question 2 here, we're looking at Korean red ginseng pre versus post, and we see that there is a statistically significant difference, meaning that these individuals did experience a benefit by their estimation. So now the question that has to enter our mind is, well, is it because of the Korean red ginseng, or is it because they're just taking something and psychologically they're thinking, well, I'm taking something, some doctors, some researchers have given me something Therefore, I have to see an improvement. And therefore, they psychologically overcome any problems that they might have, or at least it helps towards overcoming those problems. And therefore, that's the reason. Not because the ginseng actually has a physiological effect, but because they psychologically kind of overcome some of their problems. So that's where the placebo comes in, because it allows for it controls for that effect. And what we find is that there's no statistical difference for the placebo, but there is a statistical difference for the red Korean ginseng. So that means then that the ginseng probably has a physiological effect, because if we compare it against the placebo, there is no statistical difference versus the placebo, but we do see a difference within the treatment, so 2.4 to 3.1, so pre versus post. Now, here we see an even greater difference, because we actually see, so for the third question, let me jump to that question real quick. So for the third question, we actually do see a difference in both measures. So we see a difference for the within treatment as well as the between treatments. So I guess I should go over the question real quick. The question is, during sexual intercourse, how often were you able to maintain your erection after you had penetrated your partner? And 1 is almost never to never, and 5 is almost always to always. And here we're looking at Korean red ginseng again, and we're seeing, yes, there is a statistically significant improvement in these numbers, so from 3 to almost 4. And then placebo, again, there's no difference. And then if you compare the between treatments, you do notice that there is a difference between the two. So here we've got even stronger evidence than question 2 that the red Korean ginseng does help. Now, I wanted to go back here to this first question and address why there might not be a difference here. The reason why I think that there might not be a difference, and this is completely speculation on my part, is that if you don't have a full recovery of your erectile dysfunction, like you're able to completely eliminate it, that psychological doubt is always going to be there. So I think what this tells you it tells me is that Korean red ginseng may help, but it doesn't completely eliminate all the erectile dysfunction. So it does have a benefit, but not to the point where it's 100% effective, where now you never have to worry about anything. You're always going to be able to perform, and always be able to develop an erection. So I think that's why we saw no significant difference for this question. And then when we start looking at more of the physiological outcomes, then we do start seeing differences. So the conclusions up to this point is that ginseng improves erection quality, but does not seem to improve confidence, as I mentioned. So the next few questions that we're going to go over is, does it help with maintaining an erection during sex, or just maintaining an erection in general? How does Korean red ginseng affect testosterone and other health markers like cholesterol? And how does Korean red ginseng actually work? What is the mechanism of action? So if you're interested in that, you can hop on over to my Physionic Insiders, where you'll find access to this study as well as all my other study analyses, my full study analyses, and seminars, office hours where you get to ask me questions live, and a private community. And there's a lot over there for sure, and it continues to build in the library. So if you're interested in that, then hop on over there and I'll speak to you then. But if not, then check out some of my other content, and I'll hope to speak with you in the future. Have a good one. Bye.